All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody to coming to our monthly museum meetings. Um, we're really excited to welcome Rob Bozell to talk to us today about NAGPRA. Rob earned his BA and MA degrees from the University of Nebraska Lincoln and has spent over 40 years as an archaeologist, much of that as the Nebraska State Archeologist. His professional interests include past subsistence practices, paleoclimates, fur trade era archaeology, indigenous archaeology of the past 2,000 years, and working with tribes um, on repatriation and historic preservation. He retired from History Nebraska, formerly the Nebraska State Historical Society, in December of 2021, but remains active in historic preservation, consulting, and various research projects. He lives in Omaha. So please, everybody, welcome Rob. I had the pleasure of working with Rob for many, many years. So I
Yeah,
think you're all
yeah.
in for a
Okay.
treat.
Thanks, Karen. Good to see you. Good to see everybody. Good to see you, Linda. I'll see you again Monday, right? We're going to take some pictures. Uh, I'm going to try to do the share screen thing. I've had some computer issues, so if I drop off, Karen's got a copy of this too, and I'll join you by phone. So uh, let me. Okay, can you see anything?
Not yet.
Uh-oh. Share. Well, I've clicked. Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute. There we go.
Oh, now we can see it.
All right. From beginning, slideshow. There. Do you see one slide? It says repatriation at the top. All right. Good. Good. Okay. Um, usually meet for what, 45 minutes or so, whatever. Okay. That's I'll probably talk for half an hour, probably a little longer, depending on how much I sort of go off on tangents. But feel free to ask questions anytime. It's a small group, so that's fine. I had sort of at the end we could ask questions, but if you have questions anytime, just raise your hand or put it in the chat or something. And Karen, you might want to kind of keep an eye out for that. If somebody's got a question, draw my attention to it. So repatriation, I'm talking a little more than just repatriation, but it involves issues that come up that we get asked about a lot. Not just returning things, but also protection of burial sites, and also what happens when skeletons are found, because it happens way more than you'd think it does. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because I had calls over the years from local museums and local sheriffs and local counties saying, hey, this guy said he found this or he's got this. What do we do? And so I want to talk about that too, because I'm sure some of you may have dealt with that. So also, my predecessor, a guy named Dave Williams, and that's his information. Dave and a couple other people organized a thing called a NAGPRA circle. They meet every couple of weeks on Zoom. I'm a member. I told him I was doing this, and he said that to feel free to invite people. So you may want to give Dave's phone number and email to people, Karen, and if they want to be involved, they'll get invited. They're interesting discussions. A lot of indigenous people there, a lot of people who are real involved in NAGPRA. It's all Nebraska stuff. And then Dave also, you guys can talk about this amongst yourselves, suggested that maybe at your, does NMA have an annual meeting, right?
Yes, every April.
Yeah. In the spring, maybe host a panel discussion about NAGPRA. Anyway, so feel free to reach out to Dave. He was excited. I tried to pawn this off on him, but he said, no, I got something I got to do today. You'll do it. And there's in terms of the NAGPRA regulations, it's 98 pages. Don't go read it. I didn't, but but at the very bottom there, the Society for American Archaeology has a really nice 8-page summary. And so if you go to that website and search NAGPRA fact sheet, it'll really cut down if you really want to learn about this stuff. It's step by step of the process without reading all 98 pages. Okay. as Karen mentioned, I've been involved in repatriation since 1990, before there was even a NAGPRA law, when there was a state law. And between then and when I retired a couple years ago, we repatriated over 1,400 individuals. Those aren't complete skeletons. Sometimes it's just one bone, and over 80,000 objects. It sounds like a lot, but compared to some other museums, it's really not. Like the Smithsonian and others, it's not a lot. And this is just kind of a summary of sort of who they've gone to. When I retired 2 years ago, there were still a few pending ones. Dave may have finished these up. I'm just not sure. But anyway, so been involved in this off and on for many years. And it's, I've enjoyed it. It's been gut-wrenching sometimes. If you get people mad at you, it's rewarding, and all of the above. So there's really two laws. Karen asked me to talk about NAGPRA, which is a federal law. There's also a state law, which I think is important for people to know on the local level, like you folks. And that's the Nebraska Unmarked Human Burial Sites and Skeleton Remains Protection Act. There isn't a good acronym for it. It doesn't roll off the tongue like NAGPRA. So anyway, and I want to talk a little bit about that and what it does. The Nebraska law, it's similar to NAGPRA, but it only applies if you have a museum with no federal funding. Most of museums, if you look deep enough, there's some federal funding, grants, IMLS grants or whatever. But if there's no federal funding, then there's still a requirement to return, and if you've got state funding, to return any human remains that you have in your collections to tribes. The other thing different about the Nebraska law, it deals with all human remains, not just Native American. And so that, NAGPRA just deals with Native American. And the state law also has this process for dealing with inadvertent discoveries, which I'll kind of cover towards the end, about what happens when somebody finds a skeleton in the field. And it happens a lot more than you think. The key to NAGPRA is lots of consultation, and it requires lots of consultation, talking to people, talking to descendants, talking to tribes. And that can be, a tribe to museum conversation, or it could be with multiple tribes. This is a group we had in Lincoln a few years ago. Communication is the key to this stuff. It really is. So, and in Nebraska, these are the primary players. These are the tribes that have had the longest history here, particularly the Pawnee, more than anybody else. Pawnee have been here for thousands of years. All the rest of them are actually kind of late, came later, 1600s, 1700s, 1800s. But the thing about tribal governments now is those are tribes. Those 7 or 8 are tribes. When you look at different tribal entities now, there's way more, because there's 8 Lakota tribes, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Sac and Fox. So when you consult, sometimes you got to consult widely, particularly if you have remains that you don't know who they belong to. There's no evidence about they're indigenous, but you don't know any more than that. So that group is 37 tribes that I came up with a few years ago that we have consulted with. Everybody I could possibly think of that might have any connection to Nebraska. And again, we don't need to go over these, but I just want to let you know that that there are a lot. Now, also by consulting, a lot of times when we wanted to deal with all these tribes, we send them all letters, we send them all emails. A lot of them don't get involved, but as long as you're keeping them abreast of things and asking for their comment, you're consulting. Now, this is where things get sticky, particularly if you get all your information from Facebook or CNN or the news media. You've probably heard a lot about lately that some museums, the Field Museum and the American Museum of Natural History, are shuttering, whole galleries because there's a new law that said that, any cultural items can't be displayed or whatever. That is not accurate, really. And in terms of NAGPRA, cultural items is not any artifact or anything. It's very, very narrowly defined. human bones, human remains, funerary objects, things that were placed with somebody as part of their mortuary ritual, like a grave offering, and sacred items and items of cultural patrimony. So most museums, again, I've only really worked in one, and that's the History of Nebraska Museum. We have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of archaeological objects, but not only a tiny fraction of those are these cultural items in terms of NAGPRA. So now the reason some museums closed off some galleries is I think they really wanted to go in and see what they had on display and make sure they didn't have any of these kind of things before they, got in trouble with tribes, because there's new regs that give a lot of deference to tribes, which is probably a good thing. Anyway, so if you've heard, because I had a lot of people calling me, oh my God, how come there's not going to be any archaeology exhibits in the world anymore? Well, that's not true at all. So cultural items is a very narrow definition. I want to, talk about what those are. The other thing in these new regulations that came out in January, that really does apply to museums. If you've got some of these things, you need to really kind of consult with tribes about, the proper storage and treatment and handling of them, and incorporating traditional knowledge. If you want to have, and that's why a lot of these galleries were closed. If you've got to have prior consent on an exhibition or research that the tribes don't think cultural items, again, this narrow definition, are going to be on display or going to be researched, or you got to consult with them. So, again, we're going through this pretty quick, and you may have a lot of questions, and feel free to answer me. We can talk afterwards too, at any time. But so these are just some things you need to kind of be aware of. These new regs, the 98 pages, are long, they're extensive. They may not apply to you, but there's a lot more detail about this storage, treatment, prior consent. I want to talk about sacred objects. Again, very, very narrowly defined. And this is really important because people don't get it. Sacred seems to be a word that I think is used too much in the world today. And so the NAGPRA definition is very specific. They're ceremonial objects needed by Native American practitioners for present day ceremonies. Okay, for present day, things they're still doing. And this is really important because people don't realize this. And I'll give you one real quick example. Back in the 90s, the History of Nebraska had maybe several hundred ethnographic Pawnee items, headdresses, moccasins, shields, stuff like that. And we had a Pawnee historian come in and look at all of those records and all of those items. He spent weeks there. And of the 300 or 400, he said there were only 3 that were sacred objects. And these were rattles that used in a ceremony they're still doing today. So anyway, it's a pretty narrow definition. Here are some pictures of artifacts. Pipes. People say, oh, pipes, they're sacred. Well, these are 1,000-year-old pipes. So they're probably not under the definition of NAGPRA, because nobody's using these particular kind of pipes anymore. They haven't been even making them for 1,000 years. Same thing with this. This is an effigy. It's actually a trade item from Cahokia, found in Nebraska. It's also a pipe, really rare. One would think, well, it's rare and it's beautiful and it's one of a kind, it must be sacred. In the terms of NAGPRA, no. Same thing, catlinite. Now they make, catlinite is made out of pipe. Pipes are made out of catlinite. Pipes can be sacred, but just debris from making pipes is not. Here's a shirt, a saddle, beautiful things, but they're just kind of everyday things. Moccasins. None of these are sacred. Now this is actually a bundle, a sacred bundle that belongs to the Kansas Historical Society. Actually, the Pawnee have title to it, but as far as I know, Kansas still has it. It is definitely a sacred object. It's definitely a sacred object. It's got great ceremonial value. They still use bundles, And this is one of those Hako rattles that I think History Nebraska has that is sacred. I don't know whether we still have that. I think we do. I think it's the same deal that the Pawnee kind of have title to it, but they want us to keep it. So anyway, these are very narrow definitions. I think that's important to recognize. There was an interesting case with the Omahas a few years ago. A woman came forward, an Omaha woman, and said, "You have a bundle that was my family's. Her grandfather had given it to us or sold it to us back in the early 1900s, and she made a claim on it." There was actually a lot of disagreement with the tribe. The tribe said, "No, you can't have it. It's a tribal bundle." And we actually had to get the opinion of the NAGPRA review people. And they said, "No, it is actually, so it's a family bundle. It's not a tribal bundle." And that's where it gets sticky. Sometimes there are sacred objects that are sacred to a family, not just the entire tribe. And we ended up repatriating it to this woman, and I don't know what she did with it, but she made a really great case that it was her family's, not the Omaha tribe. Objects of cultural patrimony is something I've never quite understood. It's items having ongoing traditional value, historical value, that were inalienable by the tribe at the time of separation. I think that has to do with, again, a lot of, in the early 1900s, a lot of, because of extreme poverty, tribes were giving and selling stuff to museums, and some of it they maybe shouldn't have. They're sacred objects that they probably shouldn't have. I can't think of a good example of an object of cultural patrimony, but there's some out there. I just don't know. If you're interested in it, I would Google it and see if there's some good examples. I couldn't really find one. So when we have skeletal remains, again, I've dealt mostly with skeletal remains, the question is, well, how do you determine who they go to? And, back before the new regs that came out in January, it was based largely on archaeological information and physical anthropology. We would take, what we knew about the archaeology and say, okay, we think these are Pawnee, or we think these are Omaha, or we don't know. We can't figure out who they are. The new regs give great new deference to Native American traditional knowledge. It's a huge change where tribes are now much more involved in making these determinations. They can step forward and say, hey, based on our customs or our burial customs or some oral tradition that has been passed down about something or other, we think this is our ancestor, so that's a big change, and how that's implemented, it's still in the works. But this, for a long time in NAGPRA, and we had a lot of these where they were culturally unidentifiable. We knew they were Native American, but we couldn't tell what tribes. There was just no evidence. That concept has kind of gone out of NAGPRA in the last 6 months. So what they're now doing, and we've done it, is sometimes if you can't figure out who somebody is the descendant of, you can appeal to geography. Okay, they're from northeast Nebraska or the mouth of the Niobrara. Let's let the Poncas take them, even though they may not be related. So people can claim ancestral remains based on their geography, not just on archaeological evidence, scientific evidence. There's also this new concept, and we've used it, of shared group identity, where you can have multiple tribes. Like those 37 tribes, we repatriated 600 remains to those 37 tribes jointly, saying, we don't know who these people, which one of you these people belong to, but we think reasonably that of these 600 unaffiliated remains, they probably are most likely related to one or all of you. So given these two things, there's no such thing anymore as saying, well, we're going to keep these skeletons because we don't know who they go to. Now there's a process where you can either do it with multiple tribes, or you can do it based on geography. And that's all coming from the tribes. NAGPRA's been around for a long time, but there was a whole lot of museums, where a lot of remains were still kept because they said, well, we're going to keep them because we can't figure out who they are. So the new regs, this is probably the greatest thing they've done, or the most significant, is that given much more deference to tribes, and there's no more saying we're going to hang on to this stuff because we know better than you do. And the Native American traditional knowledge is expert opinion, things they know, their philosophies, their beliefs, their mythology, their traditions, their skills. It's a lot of stuff. It's just a few pictures of this is me and a couple of Pawnee guys looking at Pawnee sacred sites, and Pawnee villages. So they have information about some places that we don't know, or that that maybe they'll share with us. And sometimes you can link remains and objects to different places. Same thing here is with us, with some Omaha folks up on the Omaha reservation, looking at this is actually a sacred site. It's another rock carving an Omaha guy showed me. So the point is that it's no longer, for the first 30 years of NAGPRA was basically that the museums told tribes, here's what we have, here's who it belongs to, we want to give it back to you. But now there's much more involvement, in them. So I do want to talk about the archaeologist, as an archaeologist, this is some of the information that we have used over the years to at least try to get at, who these remains might be. Burial customs, how there's different kinds of burials. There's mass burials and individual burials, the orientation of the burial, the whether they're extended, laying down like we accustomedly bury people, or whether they're flexed. Associated artifacts, if somebody's buried with a certain kind of pot or a certain kind of object that's diagnostic of that tribe, that's super helpful. We can do dating, we don't radiocarbon date bone, but we could date a piece of charcoal that might be associated with the bone, and location, where in the state it is. So that's the kind of archaeological information we look at. There's, some of the traditional area, it's like we got a bunch of burials there where in that green area, which are Pawnee. We're going to start looking at Pawnee. May not be, but that's, a good place to start. Same thing with pottery. Pottery is great because that decoration changes through time, and different groups, different bands, even different families have different kinds of ways they decorate their pots. And if you look at, the different kinds of decoration, you can sometimes say, okay, it's probably about this old, and it might be related to this tribe, and it might even be related to this band, so that's good archaeological information. Same thing, just some more, pottery with different kinds of decorations. This is all Pawnee and Odo. Craniometrics. This is something that, when I was in graduate school was a big deal. I don't know if it's as big of a deal anymore, but I think there's still some good science to it. When people look differently, right? We have light skin, we have dark skin, we have people are tall, so, some groups are shorter. You have different kind of hair texture. You have different colored eyes, and some of that is biological. Mediterranean people look different than Scandinavian people. So that is also true on the skeleton. There are, if the craniometrics, if you take a bunch of measurements on a skull, which we don't really do that anymore, there are, the Pawnees and the Omahas and the Lakota, they just kind of look different, because they have different biological histories. So you can use that information too. Now, this is the time when I always get the question, what about DNA? What about DNA? Well, that's something that's revolutionized my field dramatically in the last 20 years. I mean, who'd have thought you could get ancient DNA out of old dry bone fragments? They're doing it out of animals and also out of humans. And that's where a lot of these answers lie. I think there's going to be more of that. Right now, there's mixed reactions from the tribes. A lot of times the first reaction is, we don't want you people crunching up our bones, even if it's a little tiny piece. We don't want you people doing that. I get it. But Summer's like, it can answer some questions. So this is a technology which is, it's pretty amazing. You can look at, I've used DNA, we don't do it, but I can add people we know who does do it on animal remains, some domestic dogs and horses. And it can tell you the eye color of the dogs. It can tell you that what kind of coat they had. It can tell you all this information. So this is a new work in progress, but I think tracing ancestry of Native American groups, there's a lot of potential in DNA. Politically, it's not, we're not there yet, but we might be at some point. Yeah, you get more DNA. You don't need archaeologists. You don't need us to look at arrowheads and pots anymore. Okay. I want to talk about accidental discoveries. Again, as I started out, you'd be shocked how many times I've gotten calls over the years from cops, local museums, who a cop has come to and said, or a farmer, a landowner, a construction worker, backhoe operators, had said, oh my God, I think I got a human bone in my field, I've exposed the skeleton. What do I do? Well, the state law and NAGPRA have answers to all that. And I we could talk about this for a long time, but again, because you'll have these slides, I just want to go over it real quick. It kind of depends on the first thing you got to, NAGPRA only applies in terms of field discoveries, not museums, to discoveries on federal or tribal land. It doesn't apply on state land or private land or county land or, Trans-Canada pipeline land or any of that. Only like, national parks and tribal land. And there isn't much federal land in Nebraska. There's not. It's not like Nevada and, the western states. So if it's not on federal land, and most of the time it isn't. Well, if it is on federal land, then the federal agency would handle it. If it's on Scottsbluff National Monument, the Park Service would deal with it. But if it's not on federal land, it comes to the state and the state process. And the first thing, if anybody walks in your office or calls you and said, I think I have a human skull in my field, call the cops. That's the first thing to do. Call the cops. Because, that's what the law says is let's make sure it's not some, recent homicide or a missing person. We've worked on homicides, sort of, and so usually then the law enforcement, whether it's a sheriff or local cop or state patrol, will maybe call us and say, we think this may be something archaeological or historic. And then History Nebraska would get involved by law. And what the law kind of says is if you can preserve something in place, that's the best thing. If you can just cover it up and preserve it in place, do it. Typically, by the time the phone rings, it's kind of too late. It's usually an active construction site, or it's eroding out of a creek bank, or a farmer's land leveling, and he's already leveled a bunch of land and there's skeletons all over. So if you can't preserve it in place, then you can excavate these remains, have the State Archaeology Office, Dave's office, would take possession of them. And once he takes possession of them, and this is what I did when I had his job, and we bring them to History Nebraska, then they become NAGPRA. Then they become part of our collection. We have to consult with tribes and figure out who they go to. Same thing as what I've been talking about in terms of tribal affiliation. So we determine what tribes. The thing that I think the Nebraska law has a bit of an advantage over, and I mentioned this earlier, it's not just Native American, it's anybody. We have found had calls, gone out on calls where they're clearly not indigenous people. They're pioneers or Oregon Trail, people who died on the Oregon Trail, or whatever. And so it doesn't have to be Native American. And the law with non-indigenous. So if it's indigenous, you have to kind of go through NAGPRA and consult with all the tribes and all that business. If it's a pioneer, or a non-indigenous person, then yeah, if you can figure out what family, you contact the family. I can only think of 2 cases where we think we knew who the family was, and that was based on some cemetery records. Most of the time, you don't know. And in that case, it's pretty simple. It goes back to the county, and the county attorney reburies it in a local cemetery. In my career, I probably had 50 of those. where we just, they were not indigenous, and they went back to the county, and the county reburies them in the local cemetery. It's pretty easy process. The other I mentioned about, just getting odd calls from counties, usually sometimes from county, local museums like you guys. When somebody dies, oh wait, I'll get back to that. Let me talk about. I'm sorry, I want to talk about this one highway project, and I'll get back to about when somebody dies and they find skeletons in their closet, literally sometimes. This is a project up on the Omaha Reservation that I was involved in 10 years ago, maybe more, which kind of involves a lot of stuff of what we're talking about. This was a DOT project, a highway project. They started construction, and a tribal member stepped forward and said, he was a guy about my age, 60s, late 60s. And he said, I think that there's graves on top of that hill where you're going to cut back for your highway. And they called us, and I went out there with him. And he said, as a little boy back in the 50s or 40s, I remember my mom saying there was graves here, and she used to have me come up here and weed, and there was little cedar posts, there was no headstones. He had this real specific memory. And, we walked over, I didn't see anything. There was no depressions, there was no headstones, there was no bones, there was nothing. But he had this really pretty specific memory. So it's on tribal land, so it's kind of a NAGPRA thing. And so we consulted with the Federal Highway Administration and the Omaha tribe, some possible descendants, the BIA. We had a big meeting, and there was really two options. Okay, we can kill this project and redesign it to avoid this hill, or we can carefully see if there's remains there and then remove them off site. And we left it up to the tribe to determine. And the Omaha tribe, they were kind of split on it, but the tribal council said, let's go with option 2. We need this highway built. It's dangerous. There's lots of crashes. We want this highway built. So let's go with not a very good option, but let's do some archaeology, and the tribe was involved. And that's exactly what we did. But that's the guy. This is the guy that found him. He's down the hill. That's their tribal historic preservation officer at the time, when we first went out there. This is the highway construction. So it's, they're cutting back you see where they cut back a hill, they make it wider for sight distance and all that stuff. So it's right on top of that hill. That's where they were. And sure enough, exactly like he said, there was 2 rows of graves. They were in rotted coffins. These are all for early reservation, 1860s to probably 1900, and they were just like exactly what he remembered. We didn't take them back to Lincoln. We didn't study them. We just put them in brand new wooden boxes and moved them off the right of way to an undisclosed location. So that kind of involves, NAGPRA. It involves tribal consultation. It all, it was painful for, I think, a lot of family members in this particular family. But it was probably the best of, some really bad scenarios. If this guy hadn't stepped forward, man, they would have been, all over in construction. It would have been a mess. There's nothing that's, good about this, but these laws, these processes, they kind of worked in this case. We came to through consultation, probably the best solution. Now, I just get all kinds of calls. So-and-so passed away, and we're going through his stuff. We're going through all this National Geographics, and we're going through all his tools, and oh my God, we open this box, there's a skull in there. Or doctors, retired doctors, they all had skeletons, in their office, remember? They had skeletons. And so that happens a lot. And again, there's a process, and I've had a lot of local museums call me and said, we were reboxing stuff, and we found all these arrowheads donated by this guy, and opened this box and there's a skull. What do we do? I used to accept those as state archaeologists. I said, we're equipped. We have a process in place. we will take them off your hand, and we will get them in the NAGPRA process. I've talked to Dave. He kind of agrees. He's done it a few times too. So again, if you open a box and you got skeletal remains, don't freak out. Don't freak out. Call Dave. Tell Dave, Rob said to call you. But so there's definitely, you know, a plan in place to deal with these. I know that's a lot of information, but that's all I've kind of got, you know, for now. Any questions? I think, Karen, you're going to make a PDF of this thing.
I am. It'll be a PDF on the NMA Monthly Musings website. So, and then I'll also put the information about the NAGPRA discussion group on there too.
Yeah, put that on there too. Yeah.
So I guess I have a question about where I can find who to contact in terms of say an object or something like that. And so this is my situation. I had somebody bring in an object that was found at a sacred site in Saunders County. And I didn't accept it, but I have it because the owner of it is in a different state. But I need to find out who I should contact. I mean, is there a website? Is it the state? I mean, who do I contact from the Pawnee that I can say, hey, somebody dropped this off. I assume it's sacred because of where it was found, but I don't know. I mean, can you help me in directing me where I should be going?
We get questions like that all the time. Is it from Pahook Hill?
Yes, that's where this person the person who donated it found it. Now, we did not accept it into our collection, so I'm just trying to find the right group to be sending.
Can I ask what it is?
It looks like a mini, like, axe head. I mean, it's like about 2 inches by 2 inches, and it's shaped like, you know, a stone axe head.
Okay.
And I've never seen anything like it before, but then I'm not an expert in that. But I'm just trying to find.
I can absolutely tell you who to contact.
Okay.
I would start with a guy named Matt Reed, R-E-E-D. Matt is the Pawnee Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. He's down in Oklahoma. Look up Pawnee Tribe of Oklahoma, or look up Matt Reed, you'll find him. And I would tell him just exactly what you said. I mean, he may look at it and say, no, it's just a rock, or it's way too old, or it's not sacred. But that would be, talk to Matt. He'll get you pointed in the right direction, you know, and I would get, if you've got some photographs of it, or take some good photographs of it.
I did take some pictures, yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
contact
great.
Matt. Contact Matt and feel free to tell him I told you.
Okay.
Yeah, he's really knowledgeable. He may not know the answer, but with the photograph, he'll know some elders and stuff that may be able to answer that question. So that's great. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Anybody else? Wow.
Everybody's so quiet.
I have a quick question. In terms of, you know, the last slide you mentioned about you know, discovering literally skeletons in other people's closets. Wouldn't that kind of more be something you know, to contact a police officer about? I'm thinking.
Well, yeah, you're right.
Okay.
I as a first contact the cops. Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Just like in a field discovery, first contact either your county attorney or the local sheriff or something and contact them. So yes, a very good point. A lot of times when we had this calls, it comes from a local museum, but via law enforcement. It's been kind of interesting. A lot of them literally were, not a lot, but I'd say 10 cases were from deceased physicians, you know, who were, you know, country doctors. They all had skeletons in their office. We have physical anthropologists look at that. She's at Offutt Air Force Base, and she can look at, you know, some of the skeletal characteristics, and they've all been South Asian, Indian, Pakistan, you know, they're from India. I don't know why, but apparently a lot of the medical skeletons are people from India, back in the mid 1900s. So yeah, anyway, definitely. Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. That was great. Yeah. Call the cops first. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? I must have done a good job, Karen.
I think you covered a lot. So I think
Yeah,
that
there's a lot there. And again, that's what I just wanted to kind of cover the basics, and I'm glad that there's a PDF available. And so as you look at it, you got more questions, Karen knows how to get a hold of me. I'd be happy to answer them. But contact Dave. If you find anything, or if anybody, a lot of times, kind of like Aaron, like your situation, people will bring things to you and say, what do I do with this? And it's interesting that, when I talked about, well, everybody says everything's sacred. Most of the time it's not. Your case, it actually might be. That's a really well-known Pawnee sacred place. It's got a lot of history and a lot of information. Could just be a natural rock, but boy, you and that person really need a pat on the back for at least trying, and hopefully Matt can point you in the right direction.
Well, if nobody else has any questions, I want to thank Rob for doing this for us. Again, the recording will be up probably after I get back from my convention, if I don't have time this week. I'll put a copy of the PowerPoint, as well as Dave's information and the NAGPRA. Oh, Tammy entering, but as well. And then I just want to remind everybody that next month is I'm doing, and it is going to be a tour of my disaster. Well, I have a disaster. It's not a disaster cart, but it'll be a tour of my disaster cart that I funded through a grant from the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation. And I have to say that it has gotten some good use this last month with the flash flooding here in Lincoln. We had some water damage in our basement, and I put it to good use. So I was very happy to have my disaster cart and disaster plan. So we'll go through it, and I'll show you all the goodies that I have stashed away in there. So thank you, Rob, for sticking with us. And if anybody has questions, I do know how to get in touch with them. So thank you, everybody. It was great seeing everybody.
Right. Good seeing everybody.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Very interesting.
All right.
See you Monday, Rob.
Yep. See you Monday. Thanks, Linda. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.